The Laredo Prophecy. The heat in Laredo didn't just sit on the land. It pressed down, a physical weight that made the air shimmer over the asphalt and squeezed the scent of dust, creosote, and river water from the earth. Isabella Ramirez felt it on her skin as she stood on her back porch, a cold glass of iced tea sweating in her hand, watching her son. Mateo, her beautiful boy, was 17, all lean muscle and dark, thoughtful eyes that had always seen too much. He was standing perfectly still in the middle of the yard, his back to her, staring at the gnarled branches of the old mesquite tree. He'd been like that for 10 minutes, a statue in the fading evening light. It was the stillness that unnerved her. It wasn't the stillness of contemplation, but of arrest, as if someone had paused a film and left a single frame burning on the screen. "Mateo," she called out, her voice cutting through the dense hum of cicadas. "Dinner's almost ready." He didn't flinch. He didn't turn. A cold dread, entirely separate from the evening's humidity, began to coil in Isabella's stomach. She set her glass down on the wooden railing, the click of glass on wood sounding unnaturally loud. She walked across the dry grass, her sandals scuffing softly. "Mijo, you okay?" She came around to face him, and the breath caught in her throat. His eyes were open, but they weren't seeing the yard or the tree or her. They were fixed on some middle distance 1,000 yards away. The expression in them was hollow, vacant, a house with the lights on and no one home. It was a look she had only ever heard described in hushed, fearful tones by her grandmother, a story passed down like a cursed heirloom. The vacant look, the one her great-grandfather Eliseo had in his eyes just before he tried to hang his own sister in the barn back in 1923. A story Isabella had always dismissed as superstitious nonsense, the kind of old country folklore her modern practical mind had no room for. She was a nurse, for God's sake. She dealt in symptoms, diagnoses, and science. But standing here now, looking into the terrifying emptiness in her own son's eyes, the old story didn't feel like folklore. Felt like a diagnosis. "Mateo," she said, sharper now, gripping his shoulders. His skin was warm, real. He was here physically. But mentally, he was somewhere else entirely. She gave him a gentle shake. "Mateo, look at me." Slow blink. Then another. The fog in his eyes seemed to recede, pulling back from some distant shore. He focused on her face, and for a moment he was her boy again. Confused. Tired. "Mom. What's wrong?" he asked, his voice raspy as if he hadn't used it in hours. She pulled him into a tight hug, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Nothing, Mijo. Nothing's wrong. You just zoned out for a second. Come on, let's get inside." She kept her arm around him, leading him back toward the house, but she couldn't stop herself from glancing back at the mesquite tree. It stood there, ancient and twisted, its branches like skeletal fingers against the bruised purple of the twilight sky. That night, after Mateo had picked at his dinner and retreated to his room with a mumbled excuse about homework, Isabella went to the one place in the house she avoided, the hall closet. It was a mausoleum of family history, stuffed with photo albums in sticky plastic sleeves, christening gowns yellowed with age, and boxes of documents her mother had insisted she keep. She pushed past winter coats that still smelled faintly of her late mother's perfume, her fingers brushing against cardboard until she found it. A simple wooden box, dark with age, its lid carved with a rose, now smooth and worn. Her great-grandfather Eliseo's box. Her abuela had given it to her mother, who had given it to her with a solemn warning. "Don't open it, Isabella. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed." She had heeded that warning for 20 years. But now, with the image of Mateo's vacant eyes burned into her mind, she carried the box to the kitchen table, its weight feeling far heavier than its physical mass. The latch was stiff, but it gave with a groan. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, were a few artifacts of a life cut short by tragedy and a stay in a state asylum. Pocket watch, its hands frozen at 3:17. A tarnished silver locket containing a picture of a severe-looking woman. And beneath it all, a leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and dry. Her hands trembled as she lifted it out. The leather felt like parchment, fragile. She opened it carefully. The pages were filled with elegant looping cursive in faded brown ink. It was in Spanish. She skimmed the first few pages. Mundane accounts of ranch life, the price of cattle, the weather. Then, about a third of the way through, the tone shifted. April 12, 1923. The dreams are back. The man with no face stands in the corner of my room. He does not speak, but I know what he wants. He wants me to see the pattern. The blood must follow the pattern. Isabella's breath hitched. She turned the page. May 3, 1923. I saw it today, clear as day. The rope. The barn beam. My sister Lupe standing on the stool. It was not a thought. It was a memory of something that has not yet happened. The man with no face showed me. He says it is the only way to quiet the buzzing in the walls. She flipped faster, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The entries became more frantic, more disjointed. June 18, 1923. The buzzing is in my teeth. Lupe is not Lupe. She is the serpent wearing my sister's skin. The prophecy is clear. The firstborn son must cleanse the bloodline when the moon eye is blind. I am the firstborn son. The moon eye will be blind on the solstice. It is my duty. The final entry was dated June 20, 1923, the day before the summer solstice. The day before he attempted to murder his sister. The handwriting was a desperate scrawl, barely legible. He is in the mirror now. The man with no face is me. See it now. The vacancy is the door. He comes through the vacancy. He says Matteo will finish it. Isabella froze. Her blood turned to ice in her veins. She read the line again, her mind refusing to process it. He says Matteo will finish it. But that was impossible. Matteo, her son, wouldn't be born for another 85 years. This was the ravings of a madman, a coincidence of a common name. Had to be. But as she sat there in the silent yellow light of her kitchen, the walls of her modern rational world began to crumble. This wasn't just a journal. It was a blueprint, prophecy. And her son was following its script. She barely slept. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind through the mesquite tree, sent a jolt of adrenaline through her. She checked on Matteo half a dozen times, each time finding him asleep. His face peaceful and young in the moonlight, a stark contrast to the hollow-eyed stranger from the yard. The next morning he was himself again. He ate a bowl of cereal, complained about his history teacher, and packed his backpack for school. He seemed to have no memory of the previous evening's episode. "You okay, Mom?" he asked, noticing her watching him too closely. "You look tired." "Just didn't sleep well," she said, forcing a smile. "Big day at the clinic." She worked as a nurse practitioner at a community health center that served both sides of the border. It was work that had always grounded her, a world of tangible problems with tangible solutions. But today, the coughs and fevers and paperwork felt trivial, a distraction from the terrifying puzzle taking shape in her mind. During her lunch break, she closed her office door and took out her phone, searching for symptoms of schizophrenia. The age of onset, the paranoid delusions, the auditory and visual hallucinations. It all fit the journal, and it all fit what she was beginning to see in Matteo. It was a genetic illness. A terrible, tragic, but scientifically explainable chain of events. This was the answer. Had to be. She clung to this diagnosis like a life raft. It was clean. It was modern. It offered a path for treatment, for medication, for management. It was so much better than the alternative, that her great-grandfather's madness was not just madness, but a kind of cursed knowledge, a supernatural infection passed down through the blood. That evening she decided to test the waters. They were eating takeout on the porch, the sky a brilliant orange over the Rio Grande. "Matteo," she began, choosing her words carefully. "Have you been having any strange dreams lately?" He shrugged, stabbing a piece of chicken with his fork. "Not really." "Why?" "No dreams about patterns. Or people with no faces." The moment the words left her mouth, she knew it was a mistake. Matteo stopped chewing. He looked at her, and for a fleeting second, she saw it again. A flicker of that vacancy, a shutter closing behind his eyes. It was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a defensive, teenage irritation. What? Well, that's weird, Mom. Why would you ask that? No reason, she said quickly, her heart sinking. Just something I read. He pushed his plate away, his appetite gone. I'm gonna go finish my physics homework. He left her on the porch, the silence now thick and heavy. She had scared him. And she had confirmed her deepest fear. The connection was there. It was real. The following Saturday, the crisis she had been dreading arrived. She was in the backyard, trying to lose herself in the simple, mindless task of pulling weeds, when she heard Matteo's voice from his open bedroom window. He wasn't talking on the phone. He was having a conversation with someone in the room. I don't understand, he was saying, his voice strained, pleading. How can it be me? I'm not him. Pause, as if listening to a reply. The moon eye. What does that mean? The solstice is next week. Isabella dropped her trowel, her hands caked with dirt. She stood frozen, listening to her son talk to the empty air, using words ripped directly from a century-old journal. The blood must follow the pattern, Matteo repeated, his voice taking on a flat, recitative quality that was utterly unlike him. I see the pattern now. The man in the mirror showed me. That was it. The life raft of a purely scientific diagnosis shattered. This was beyond psychosis. This was an echo. Possession. Prophecy unfolding in real time. She didn't bother going through the house. She ran around the side, her pulse roaring in her ears, and scrambled up the trellis he'd never quite taken down since he was a kid. She hauled herself onto the roof outside his window, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She peered inside. Matteo was standing in front of his full-length mirror, but he wasn't looking at his own reflection. He was staring intently at the empty space beside it, his head cocked as if listening to someone just out of sight. His eyes held that same terrifying vacancy. I understand, he whispered to the empty air. The serpent wears my face. Isabella didn't knock. She shoved the window open, the frame groaning in protest, and tumbled into his room. Matteo spun around, his eyes wide with shock, and then, horrifyingly, with a flash of something that looked like recognition, but not of her. It was the look of someone who had been discovered. Mom, what are you doing? Who are you talking to, Matteo? She demanded, her voice shaking. No one. I was just thinking aloud. You were talking about the pattern, about the man in the mirror, about the serpent. His face went pale. The vacant look was gone, replaced by sheer, unadulterated fear. He looked like a little boy again, caught in a nightmare. How do you know about that? He whispered. She crossed the room and took his hands. They were ice cold. Because it's not just you, Mijo. It happened to your great-great-grandfather, too. I have his journal. He wrote down the same things you're saying. His eyes searched hers, desperate for an anchor in the storm of his own mind. What's happening to me, Mom? Am I going crazy? No, she said, pulling him into a fierce hug, her mind racing. No, you're not crazy. But we need to figure this out. Together. She led him downstairs and made him hot chocolate, like she used to when he was small and had a bad dream. She didn't show him the journal. Not yet. The contents were too frightening, too suggestive. But she knew what she had to do. The answers weren't in a medical textbook or a psychiatrist's office. The answers were buried in the past, in the dust of Laredo's history, in the secrets her family had tried to forget. The next day she called in sick to work. She told Matteo she was taking him to San Antonio for the day, a surprise trip to the museums. It was a lie. She was taking him to the one place she hoped could provide answers, a place that existed in the liminal space between two worlds, just like their curse. They were going to cross the border into Nuevo Laredo to find the old curandera, Abuela Rosario, who lived in the colonia on the edge of the city, the woman her own mother had spoken of in whispers, the woman who knew about things that modern medicine could not explain. Part 2. The bridge was a throat, swallowing them whole. The transition from Laredo to Nuevo Laredo was always a visceral one for Isabella, the neat, grid streets giving way to a vibrant, chaotic tapestry of sound and color, the air thickening with the smells of diesel, roasting corn. And something else, something ancient and dusty. Today, the crossing felt like a descent into another realm entirely, a journey not just across a border, but into the shadowy geography of her own bloodline. Matteo was silent in the passenger seat, his gaze fixed on the thrumming life outside the window. The vacant look was gone, but a new tension had taken its place, a watchful, brittle awareness, as if he were waiting for a signal only he could hear. "This isn't the way to San Antonio," he said flatly, not looking at her. "We're making a detour," Isabella said, her hands tight on the steering wheel. "There's someone I need to see. Someone who might be able to help. A doctor. A different kind of doctor." He fell silent again, accepting this with an unnerving passivity that scared her more than his questions would have. She navigated the familiar yet always foreign streets, moving away from the tourist-friendly zones and into the colonias, where the pavement turned to rutted dirt and brightly painted cinderblock houses stood shoulder to shoulder with structures of corrugated tin and reclaimed wood. She found the house at the end of a dusty lane, marked not by a number but by a massive ancient pepper tree that shaded the entire yard, its branches hung with dozens of tiny, faded milagros, tiny metal charms in the shapes of hearts, arms and eyes. Abuela Rosario was sitting on a wooden stool in the shade, grinding something in a stone molcajete. She was impossibly old, her face a web of deep lines, her hair a shock of pure white, but her eyes, when they lifted to meet Isabella's, were black and sharp as obsidian. They held a deep, unsettling knowing. "You are Maria's daughter," the old woman said, her voice a dry rustle of leaves. It wasn't a question. "The one who lives in the world of steel and glass. You have his eyes." A chill, unrelated to the shade, crept down Isabella's spine. "His. Eliseo's." She set the molcajete aside and gestured to two low stools beside her. "Sit. And you, the boy, you carry his shadow. Sit also." Matteo hesitated, but something in the old woman's commanding presence compelled obedience. He sat, his knees drawn up, looking young and terribly vulnerable. "How did you know why we were coming?" Isabella asked. Abuela Rosario chuckled, a sound like pebbles tumbling in a dry gourd. "The blood sings its song, Nina. I have been listening to your family's discordant melody for a very long time. I knew when the song changed in Eliseo. I know it has changed again in your son." She turned her piercing gaze on Matteo. "You see the man with no face, don't you, Mijo? He stands in the corner of your room when the world is quiet." Matteo's head jerked up, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and relief. You know about him." "He is not a man," Rosario said. "He is a hunger, a vacancy that seeks to be filled. Your bloodline has a crack in it, a door that he has learned to open. Eliseo called it the vacancy. It is a place, not a look. A gateway." Isabella felt the world tilt. This was it. The confirmation she both needed and dreaded. The journal, he wrote about a prophecy. That the firstborn son must cleanse the bloodline when the moon eye is blind. The summer solstice. He said Matteo would finish it. Rosario nodded slowly, her aged face grave. The Seguidad de la Luna. The time of greatest power when the sun stands still. The veil is thin. And the hunger is strongest. It whispers the old patterns, the violent solutions. It convinces the sun that the only way to seal the crack, to silence the buzzing, is to spill the blood of the one who shares the taint. A sister, a mother. It is a lie, but a powerful one. "It's a genetic illness," Isabella insisted, the nurse in her making one last, desperate stand. "Schizophrenia. It fits the symptoms." "Por qué no los dos?" Rosario asked softly. "Why not both? The mind creates the channel, but the thing that flows through it. That is older than medicine. Your science names the lock, but it does not know the key, or the thing trying to get through the door." She leaned forward, her scent a mix of dried herbs and earth. Eliseo was not the first. He was simply the one who wrote it down. This pattern, this hunger, it has been walking with your family for generations, waiting for the right combination of mind and moment. What does it want? Mateo's voice was a whisper. To be real, Rosario said. It is a shadow and it wants form. It feeds on the terror, the certainty, the spilled blood. Each time it succeeds, the crack widens. The pattern deepens. It is learning. She looked at Isabella. Eliseo was stopped. The pattern was interrupted. The hunger was denied its feast. Has been waiting, growing hungrier. It will not be denied again. The reality of it crashed down on Isabella, suffocating and absolute. This was not a metaphor. It was a parasitic inheritance, a predator woven into their DNA. How do we stop it? How do we break the pattern? Abuela Rosario's gaze was unwavering. You cannot break it with the tools it understands. Violence is its language. Medicine alone is a bandage on a spiritual wound. You must do what has never been done before. You must refuse the script entirely. You must find a third door. A third door. The prophecy offers two choices: succumb to the madness and fulfill the violence, or fight it and be destroyed by it. You must find a third path. The hunger understands sacrifice. It does not understand sacrifice. She stood up, her movements surprisingly fluid, and went into her small dark house, returning with a small drawstring pouch made of black cloth. She handed it to Mateo. Wear this. It will not stop him, but it will make his voice fainter, like a radio with static. It will give you a moment to choose. Mateo took the pouch. It was warm, and it smelled of rosemary and something metallic, like ozone before a storm. He tucked it into the pocket of his jeans, a flicker of hope in his eyes. And for me? Isabella asked. What do I do? You are the mother, Rosario said, as if this explained everything. Your love is the wild card the pattern did not account for. Eliseo's mother feared him. Your mother feared the story. You are not afraid to climb through a window. You must be the memory he lacks. When the vacancy comes, you must remind him who he is. Not Eliseo. Not the firstborn son of a curse. He is Mateo, your son. You must anchor him in a reality stronger than the one the hunger offers. She gave them a bundle of herbs to burn in his room and strict instructions to seek out a specific place before the solstice. There is a canyon, Canon de la Lechuza, north of the city. Place of silent stone. The hunger's voice is weak there. Go there before the sun stands still. It may give you the clarity you need to find your third door. The drive back to Laredo was shrouded in a heavy, contemplative silence. The modern skyline of her city, once a symbol of order and progress, now looked like a fragile facade. That night, Isabella didn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table with Eliseo's journal, reading it not as a historical curiosity, but as an intelligence report from the front lines of a war she was now fighting. The phrases leaped out at her, their meaning horrifically clear. The serpent wears my sister's skin. Capgras delusion. The buzzing is in the walls. Auditory hallucinations. The blood must follow the pattern. The compulsive, violent imperative. It was all there, a perfect clinical picture, and yet it was so much more. It was a sentient sickness, a meme of madness that learned and adapted. Few days later, the first real test came. She woke to the sound of breaking glass. She ran to Mateo's room to find him standing amid the shards of his water glass, his chest heaving, staring at his own reflection in the dark window. It's not me, he panted, his eyes wide with horror. Mom, it's not me in the mirror. It's him. He's wearing my face. The vacancy was complete. He was looking right at her, but he didn't see her. He saw the serpent. Remembering Rosario's words, Isabella did not panic. She did not try to reason with the delusion. Instead, she walked slowly into the room, ignoring the glass, and began to speak, her voice low and steady, a thread of reality weaving through his terror. Your name is Mateo Isandro Ramirez. You were born on a Tuesday at 4:02 p.m. at Mercy Hospital. You weighed 7 pounds 2 ounces. You had a shock of black hair and you gripped my finger and wouldn't let go. She kept her eyes locked on his, pouring every ounce of her love, her memory, her certainty into him. You were afraid of the vacuum cleaner until you were 5. Your favorite book was Good Night Moon. You scored the winning goal in your Pee-wee soccer league. You are my son. She repeated his name, a mantra against the void. Matteo. Matteo. For a long moment nothing happened. He remained frozen, a stranger wearing her son's skin. Then a tremor went through him. His eyes flickered, the absolute darkness in them receding like a tide. He blinked, and a single tear traced a path through the sweat on his temple. He looked down at the broken glass, then at his hands, then at her. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm so scared." She caught him as his legs gave way, holding him as he sobbed, her own tears mixing with his hair. She had done it. She had pulled him back. But the victory felt fragile, temporary. The solstice was only 4 days away. The hunger was getting stronger, and she was no closer to finding the mythical third door. The pattern was tightening its grip, and she was running out of time. Part 3. The dust in Canon de la Lechuza was a fine, pale powder that rose in ghostly plumes with every step, coating their shoes and drying their throats. The silence was the first thing Isabella noticed, a profound, heavy quiet that seemed to swallow the hum of the distant highway and the ever-present buzz of life. It was a geological silence, born of ancient limestone and a sky so vast and blue it felt like a physical dome. They had left before dawn, the oppressive Laredo heat still a memory, the air in the canyon still cool and carrying the scent of desert sage and dried earth. Matteo walked beside her, the black pouch from Abuela Rosario clutched tightly in his fist. He had been quiet but present since they'd left the city, the brittle tension in his shoulders gradually easing the deeper they ventured into the stark, beautiful desolation. "It's quiet in here," he said, his voice barely disturbing the stillness. "Not just quiet, but inside my head. It's quiet." Isabella felt a surge of desperate hope. The Karandra had been right. This place, this silent stone, was a sanctuary. "Good," she said, her voice soft. "Let's just walk." They followed a dry creek bed, the only path through the canyon walls that rose around them in stratified layers of time. The sun climbed, painting the limestone in shades of gold and ochre. For the first time in weeks, they were just a mother and a son on a hike, not warden and prisoner to a terrifying legacy. They talked about nothing, the shape of a hawk circling high above, the resilience of a cactus growing from a crack in the rock, the strange maze-like patterns eroded into the stone by millennia of wind and water. It was while tracing one of these intricate labyrinthine patterns with her finger that Isabella stopped, a thought striking her with the force of a physical blow. "Matteo," she said, her voice trembling. "The pattern." He looked at her, confused. In the journal, great-grandfather Eliseo kept writing about the pattern. He said the blood must follow it. We always assumed he meant the pattern of violence. The hanging. But what if the pattern itself is the key? She pointed at the swirling, concentric lines carved into the rock. What if it's not a script, but a lock? And the violence is just the wrong key, the one the hunger wants us to use. Matteo stared at the stone, his brow furrowed in concentration. The vacant look was blessedly absent, replaced by a sharp, analytical focus she hadn't seen in him for months. "A lock," he repeated slowly. "And we need to find the right key." "A third door," Isabella whispered, the Karandra's words echoing in the canyon silence. "Not violence, not surrender. Something else." They spent hours in the canyon, sitting in the shade of a towering cliff face, Eliseo's journal open between them. They read it with new eyes, no longer as a horror story, but as a cryptic manual. The phrases they had found the most frightening now seemed like clues. "The man with no face is me. The serpent wears my sister's skin. I am the firstborn son." "It's all about identity," Matteo said, his voice gaining strength. "The hunger. It works by making you doubt who you are, who others are. Separates you. It makes you see enemies in your family. He looked at his mother, his eyes clear and painfully young. That's the pattern. Division. Isolation. And the violence is the ultimate expression of that. Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs. He was right. The clinical term was dissociation, but this was a predatory form of it. The curse wasn't just a urge to kill. It was a systematic dismantling of the self and its connections to others, creating the perfect void for the hunger to inhabit. So the key, she began, is connection, Matteo finished, his gaze intense. Not just you reminding me, Mom, but me holding on, me remembering me. He looked down at the journal, at the frantic century-old scrawl. He was alone. His family was terrified of him. They locked him away. They fed the isolation. They fed the pattern. A resolve, hard and clear as the canyon stone, settled within Isabella. We won't. We do the opposite. We feed the connection. We starve the pattern. The drive back to Laredo was filled not with dread, but with a frantic, hopeful energy. They had a theory. A fragile, untested weapon against a centuries-old evil, but it was more than anyone in their family had ever had before. They stopped at a mercado and bought lengths of sturdy red cord, the color of lifeblood, of vitality, of the ties that bind. That evening, as the sun set and the shadows in the house grew long, they began their work. They didn't board up windows or hide sharp objects. Instead, they sat at the living room floor, the red cord between them. "Tell me a memory," Isabella said. "Any memory. The first one that comes to mind." Matteo was hesitant at first, the weight of the impending solstice a palpable presence in the room. But he began to speak. I remember when I was 6 and I fell off my bike and skinned my knee. You carried me all the way home, even though I was probably too heavy. You sang that silly song about the little duck." As he spoke, Isabella took the red cord and began to tie a knot, a tangible, physical representation of the memory. Then it was her turn. "I remember the first time you read a book aloud to me. You were 4. It was The Very Hungry Caterpillar. You were so proud." She tied another knot. They went on for hours, their voices a soft counterpoint to the gathering night. They wove a chain of memory, a rope of shared existence, knot by knot. They laughed about forgotten vacations, cried over the loss of a family pet, remembered Christmases and boring Sundays. With each story, each knot, the oppressive atmosphere in the house seemed to lighten. The chain grew longer, a coiled scarlet serpent of love and history lying on the floor between them. Finally, as midnight approached, Matteo grew quiet. The effort of the day, the emotional intensity, was taking its toll. The fragile clarity he'd found in the canyon was beginning to waver. The static is coming back," he said, his voice tight. "The man in the mirror. He's whispering." Isabella's hope faltered. Had it all been for nothing? Were words and memories and pieces of string really a match for this? Then Matteo looked at the red cord, coiled on the floor. He reached out and picked up one end, his fingers tracing the knots. "But I can feel these," he whispered, wonder in his voice. "When I touch this knot, I can feel the sun on my skin from that day at the beach. When I touch this one, I can smell the chocolate chip cookies we baked." He looked at his mother, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "It's real. This is real." He stood up, a new determination on his face. He walked to his bedroom, Isabella following close behind, her heart in her throat. He stood before the full-length mirror. The vacant look was trying to claim his features, a fog threatening to descend. "I see you," Matteo said to his reflection, his voice trembling but clear. "I know what you are. You are the hunger. You are the vacancy. But you are not me." He held up the length of red cord, the knots a testament to a life lived. "This is me. My name is Matteo Isandro Ramirez. I am my mother's son." He looped the cord around his wrist, tying it securely. For a long, breathless moment, he stared into the mirror, his chest heaving. Isabella watched, ready to intervene, to pull him back with her voice, her touch, her very soul. Then something shifted. The tension drained from his shoulders. The fog in his eyes receded, not pushed back by her words this time, but banished by his own. He turned from the mirror and looked at her, exhausted but utterly, completely present. "It didn't like that," he said, a faint, weary smile touching his lips. "It doesn't know what to do with this." He had done it. He had found the anchor within himself. He had used their shared history not as a lifeline thrown to him, but as a shield he had chosen to raise himself. They didn't sleep that night. They sat together in the living room, the red cord between them, talking softly as the hours crept toward the dawn of the summer solstice. The monster was still there. The pattern was still waiting. The greatest test was yet to come. But for the first time since she'd seen that vacant look in her son's eyes, Isabella believed, with a ferocious maternal certainty, that they had a fighting chance. They had found a key. Now they had to see if it would turn the lock. Part 4. The day of the solstice dawned hot and unnaturally still. The air in Laredo was thick, syrupy, as if the atmosphere itself were holding its breath. The buzzing of the cicadas, usually a constant backdrop, had fallen silent. Isabella felt it the moment she woke. A pressure drop in the world, a tightening in the fabric of reality. The Seguridad de la Luna. The time when the sun stood still, and the veil was at its thinnest. Mateo was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table, the red cord wrapped tightly around his left wrist. His knuckles were white. He looked up as she entered, and the fear in his eyes was a living thing. "It's like a drum," he whispered. "A heartbeat. But it's not mine. It's in the walls. In the floor. It's everywhere." The hunger was no longer whispering. It was pounding. Isabella's modern mind, her nurse's training, screamed for her to call a doctor, to demand sedatives, to seek the cold, sterile safety of a hospital. But she knew, with a certainty that went deeper than bone, that it would be a death sentence. It would be isolation. It would be feeding the pattern. They had to face this together, here, in the heart of their home. "We're ready," she said, pouring him a glass of water. Her hand steady despite the frantic rhythm of her own heart. She repeated Abuela Rosario's words like a prayer. "You are the wild card. Your love is the wild card." They had spent the morning reinforcing their defenses. Photographs were scattered across every surface. Mateo as a gap-toothed first grader, beaming with a lost front tooth. The three of them, Isabella, Mateo, and his father before the divorce, at the beach, sunburned and happy. Mateo and his abuela, her arms wrapped around him. The physical evidence of a life lived. The red cord, now a long, intricate chain of hundreds of knots, was coiled in the center of the living room floor like a sacred object. As the sun climbed to its zenith, the true siege began. Mateo jerked in his chair, his hand flying to his temple. "He's not in the mirror anymore," he gasped. "He's here. In the room." Isabella saw nothing but the familiar furniture, the dust motes dancing in a sliver of sunlight. But she felt it, a cold spot in the room, a draining of sound, as if they were suddenly at the bottom of a deep well. "The blood knows the pattern," Mateo said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming flat and hollow. It was his mouth moving, but the cadence was all wrong. "The firstborn son must cleanse the line. The serpent is here. She wears your face." He was looking directly at her, but his eyes were the vacant, clouded windows she had seen in the backyard. The hunger had filled the vacancy completely. "Mateo," Isabella said, her voice firm, projecting a calm she did not feel. "My name is Isabella Maria Ramirez. I am your mother. You are Mateo. You are in our home in Laredo. It is the day of the summer solstice." He stood up, the chair scraping harshly against the tile floor. "Lies. The pattern is truth. The blood is truth. She is the serpent. She must be unmade." He took a step toward her. There was no weapon in his hand, but his hands were curled into claws, the muscles in his arms corded with a terrifying tension. This was it. The moment Eliseo had lived. The moment of violent, horrific choice. Isabella stood her ground. She did not retreat. She did not plead. She reached down and picked up the end of the red cord. "You are Matteo," she repeated, her voice unwavering. "You tied this knot when you remembered learning to ride your bike." She held out the cord. "You tied this one when you told me about your first crush on Sarah Mendoza. You tied this one when you remembered the sound of your father's laughter." He flinched as if struck. The hollow voice snarled, "Noise. Meaningless noise to distract from the purpose." But he took another step. His gaze fixed on her with a predatory intensity. Isabella began to walk backward, slowly, leading him, not away from the memory, but deeper into it. She moved toward the hallway, toward his bedroom. "This is the doorframe where we marked your height every birthday," she said. Her voice a steady drumbeat against the static of the curse. "You were so proud when you finally passed me." She backed into his room. The man in the mirror was gone because the man was in him. But the room was a museum of his life. Trophies, books, a half-finished model airplane, the poster of the solar system he'd begged for in 3rd grade. "The pattern demands it," he roared, the sound tearing from his throat, raw and painful. He lunged for her. Isabella didn't try to fight him. She didn't try to reason with the delusion. She did the one thing the pattern, the hunger, could not comprehend. As his hands reached for her, she embraced him. She wrapped her arms around her son and held him tight, pulling him against her, the red cord trapped between them. "I love you, Matteo," she whispered into his ear, her voice breaking with the force of her emotion. "I have loved you since the moment I knew you existed. I love the boy you were and the man you are becoming. I love you more than any curse, any pattern, any hunger in the dark." He struggled against her, a terrifying, brutal strength in his limbs. He was trying to push her away, to break her hold, to fulfill the ancient, bloody imperative. "Let go." The hollow voice grated. "Never," Isabella sobbed, holding on with every ounce of her strength, her love a physical force, a bulwark against the void. "I will never let you go. You are my son." She felt his body shudder violently. A guttural sound, a battle between two entities for possession of a single soul, erupted from him. He was shaking, his muscles locked. Then his hands, which had been pushing against her shoulders, slowly, tremulously, came up and clutched at her back. The vacant look in his eyes shattered. A ragged, desperate breath tore from his lungs, and he collapsed against her, his full weight suddenly supported by her arms. He was crying great, heaving sobs that racked his entire body. "Mom," he choked out, his own voice, high and terrified and 17 years old. "Mom, I'm here. I'm here." He had not defeated the hunger with violence. He had not been defeated by it. He had, in the final critical moment, chosen her. He had chosen their connection. He had chosen love over the pattern. They sank to the floor together, holding each other as the oppressive weight in the house began to lift. The cold spot vanished. The silent, pounding pressure receded, not with a bang, but with a whisper of frustrated rage that faded into nothing. The sun outside the window seemed to shift, the intense, still light of the solstice peak beginning to soften into afternoon. The pattern was broken. It was not a clean break, not a magical cure. The crack in their bloodline, as Abuela Rosario had called it, was still there. Matteo would likely always carry the vulnerability, the neurological signature that had made him a target. But the sentient hunger, the predatory echo that had used that crack for generations, had been denied. It had been shown a power it could not overcome, a script it had not written. Weeks later, life had found a new, quieter rhythm. Matteo was in therapy, taking a low dose of medication to help stabilize the neurochemical landscape the hunger had exploited. But the real work happened at home, with the red cord, with the stories, with the deliberate daily practice of connection. One evening, Isabella found him at the kitchen table, Eliseo's journal open before him. Her heart stuttered for a moment, an old fear flaring. He looked up, his expression thoughtful but clear. "He was so alone, Mom," he said softly. He didn't have anyone to hold on to him. He only had the hunger. He closed the journal with a sense of finality. "We should burn it." Isabella nodded. They took it into the backyard under the mesquite tree. As the flames consumed the brittle pages and the frantic century-old script, Isabella felt the last ghost of her great-grandfather finally release its grip on her family. The prophecy was not fulfilled. It was retired. The horror was not a monster in the dark. It was the story they had been told about themselves. And they had written a new ending. The Laredo Prophecy was over, replaced by the quieter, more resilient story of a mother and a son who had looked into the abyss of their own blood and, instead of seeing a curse, had chosen to see each other. The ashes of Eliseo's journal were a dark stain on the earth beneath the mesquite tree, a Rorschach test of their liberation. For a week, then a month, the silence in the house felt earned. It was the quiet of convalescence, of a deep psychic wound slowly knitting itself closed. The oppressive heat of the Laredo summer began to relent, giving way to the softer golden light of early autumn. The world, which had narrowed to the terrifying confines of a single bloody pattern, began to expand again. Matteo returned to school, part-time at first, then full-time. The other students glanced at him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. The boy who'd been mysteriously absent, the boy who now wore a simple black cord, not the red one around his wrist, a quieter reminder of his anchor. He didn't mind. The noise of their speculation was a welcome change from the whispers in his own head. He started painting again, but his canvases were different. The feverish, abstract horrors were gone, replaced by landscapes of the canyon, studies of the mesquite tree, portraits of his mother that captured not just her likeness, but her fierce, unwavering love. Isabella went back to the clinic. The coughs and fevers and diabetic screenings were no longer trivial. They were sacred. They were problems with solutions, pains that could be soothed. She looked at the families in her waiting room with new eyes, seeing the invisible threads of love and history that bound them, the silent battles they fought in the privacy of their own homes. One Saturday they drove back to Nuevo Laredo. The journey felt different this time. Not a descent into a shadow world, but a visit to a wise elder. Abuela Rosario was waiting for them on her stool, as if she hadn't moved. Her obsidian eyes scanned them both, and a genuine warm smile cracked the landscape of her face. "The song has changed," she said without preamble. "The discord is gone. It is a new melody, quieter, stronger." She looked at Matteo's wrist. "You do not need the pouch anymore." Matteo touched the black cord. "I know, but I like it. It reminds me that the quiet is real." The old woman nodded in approval. "A wise choice. You have not killed the monster, you understand. You have tamed the part of it that lived inside you. You have shown it that your story is not for it to write." "That's what it felt like," Matteo said, his voice low with the memory. "It wasn't a fight. It was a refusal." "Exactly." Rosario turned her gaze to Isabella. "And you, Madre? You did not break the cycle with a sword. You wove a new one with your hands. A cycle of memory. Choice. That is a power that runs deeper than any curse." They drank bitter, strong tea with her, the three of them sitting in the shade of the pepper tree, the milagros tinkling softly in the breeze. Felt like a blessing. But a legacy of trauma does not vanish overnight. It leaves ghosts in the form of triggers. For Matteo it was extreme stress. A failed physics test could bring on a night of fitful sleep and a morning with a familiar, dull ache behind his eyes. The sound of raised voices from a neighbor's television once sent him into a panic attack, his breath coming in short gasps as the world threatened to tilt. The vacancy was a door that had been slammed shut, but they both knew it was still there in the architecture of his mind, a locked room they had to vigilantly guard. The true test came in November. The anniversary of the day Isabella had first seen the vacant look in his eyes. A cold front had blown in, and the house was filled with the scent of the first pot of chili simmering on the stove. Isabella was chopping onions when she heard a crash from the living room. Her heart froze. The knife clattered into the sink. She rushed in to find Matteo standing by the bookcase, a shattered picture frame at his feet, a photo of them at the Canon de la Lechuza. He was staring out the window at the skeletal branches of the mesquite tree, rattling in the wind. "Mateo," she said, her voice carefully calm. He didn't turn. "He's back," he whispered, his voice thick with terror. The man in the mirror. He saw him. Just for a second. The old fear, cold and slick, coiled in Isabella's stomach. Had they been wrong? Had they only delayed the inevitable? But then she saw it. His right hand was clenched into a fist, but his left was gripping his wrist. His fingers pressed against the black cord. He was fighting. He was not a passive vessel this time. He was a soldier on watch, spotting an enemy scout and raising the alarm. She didn't run to him. She didn't bombard him with memories. She walked to his side and stood with him, looking out at the same tree. "It's a trigger," she said softly. "The weather. The anniversary. Your brain is remembering the fear. It's trying to follow the old, familiar path. But it's just a path, Mateo. You don't have to walk down it." He took a shuddering breath. The door felt open. "Then close it," she said. "You have the key now. You are the key." He closed his eyes, his knuckles white. She could see the internal battle playing out on his face, the ancient pull of the pattern versus the new, hard-won strength of his will. He was whispering to himself, so low she could barely hear it. "My name is Mateo Isandro Ramirez. I am my mother's son. I choose this reality." A full minute passed, the only sound the rattling of the branches and the frantic beating of Isabella's heart. Then, slowly, his shoulders relaxed. He opened his eyes and looked at her, exhausted but clear. The vacancy had not taken hold. It had been shown the door and had retreated. "It's closed," he said, and the relief in his voice was palpable. He looked down at the broken glass. "I'm sorry about the picture." "I'm not," Isabella said, her own relief so powerful it made her knees weak. She fetched the dustpan and brush. As they cleaned up the shards together, she understood this was their new normal. There would be skirmishes. There would be bad days. But the war was over. They had the tools, the strategy, and the unshakable alliance to win every battle from now on. That Christmas, they started a new tradition. Instead of one big gift, they gave each other a memory, written on a small piece of paper and tied with a red string. Mateo gave his mother the memory of her teaching him to drive, her white-knuckled grip on the dashboard making them both laugh until they cried. Isabella gave him the memory of the day in the canyon, the moment they deciphered the pattern and found their key. They placed them in a small wooden box on the mantelpiece, a growing collection of their chosen legacy. One evening in the deep winter, Isabella was going through her mother's old things, finally able to face them without the shadow of the curse looming over her. In a box of linens, she found a small, folded square of embroidered cloth. She unfolded it. It was a handkerchief, yellowed with age, and in the corner, embroidered in a delicate fading thread, was a single image. A labyrinth, not unlike the patterns they had seen in the canyon. And beneath it, 2 words. El Tejedor, the weaver. Her breath caught. She remembered a line from Eliseo's journal, one she had barely registered in her frantic first reading. The weaver spins the pattern, but whose hand holds the shuttle? She had always assumed the weaver was the hunger, the malevolent force spinning their doom. But looking at this handkerchief, a woman's object, passed down through the maternal line, a new understanding dawned. What if the weaver wasn't the curse? What if the weaver was the role her family had forgotten? The one who could reweave the pattern. The hunger hadn't been the weaver. It had been a parasite trying to hijack the loom. She was the weaver. Her love, her memories, her refusal to surrender. That was the shuttle. She hadn't just broken a curse. She had taken up her rightful place in the lineage, not as a victim of the pattern, but as its master. She took the handkerchief and placed it in the memory box on the mantel. It belonged there. It was a testament, a silent message from the women who had come before her, who had likely fought their own quieter battles against the darkness in their blood. Spring returned to Laredo, and with it, a sense of peace that felt permanent. Matteo was preparing for his college applications. He wasn't going to study accounting or engineering. He was applying for art school with a minor in psychology. "I want to understand it," he told his mother. "Not just my brain but the connection. How what we feel for each other can literally reshape our reality." Isabella stood on the back porch, a warm glass of tea in her hand, watching him set up an easel in the yard. He was painting the mesquite tree, now budding with new green leaves. There was no vacancy in his eyes, only the focused intensity of an artist capturing the light. The horror wasn't a monster. It was a story written in their DNA, a terrible inheritance. But they had proven that even the most deeply written stories could be edited. The past was not a prison. It was a foundation. And the future was not a prophecy. It was a blank canvas, waiting for the hand of the weaver. If you enjoyed my story and would like to help me create more, your support through a small donation would mean the world to me. Thank you so much in advance. Now, tell me, what would you have done in this person's place? I'd really love to hear your thoughts, so please share them in the comments below. I'm always eager to know your perspectives and where you first discovered this story. If you'd like to hear more real-life stories like this one, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to my channel. There are many more waiting for you. With warm regards, Vin.